The world had shrunk to the size of my one-room apartment, a space where the scent of stale coffee and anxiety mingled in the humid air. My days were a metronome of quiet desperation. Wake up, search for freelance graphic design gigs that paid pennies, eat instant noodles, sleep. The routine was a fortress I'd built against the memory of a life that had collapsed, taking my confidence and my savings with it. My only escape was a walk, a long, meandering path I took each evening along the waterfront, ending at the marina. It was a place of quiet wealth and purposeful movement, everything my life was not. It was there I first saw him, or rather, his boat, the Resolute, a name that felt like a quiet promise. It wasn't the largest vessel in the marina, nor the flashiest, but it was perfect. Its lines were classic, the teak decks glowing with a deep, honeyed warmth that spoke of countless hours of patient care. And its owner was a reflection of the boat itself. He was older, maybe 50, with silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. His movements were economical and sure, whether he was coiling a rope or simply standing at the helm, watching the sun dip below the horizon. He had a stillness about him, a self-contained gravity that drew my eye every single time. I never spoke to him. I wouldn't have known what to say. I was just a ghost haunting the edges of his world, a young man in a worn-out jacket, observing a life of substance from a safe and lonely distance. He was a symbol of a stability I craved, a quiet strength I felt I'd lost for good. I would watch him for a few minutes each evening, a secret ritual, before turning back to my cramped apartment, the scent of salt water a temporary balm against the mustiness of my own stagnation. I kept a small, smooth stone I'd found on the pier in my pocket. Sometimes, sitting at my desk, I'd roll it between my fingers and think of the steady, unhurried way he moved about his deck. The catalyst came on a Tuesday. I'd picked up a temporary job, a series of deliveries for a local chandlery. It was mindless work, hauling boxes of varnish and brass fittings, but it paid enough to cover rent, and more importantly, it got me out of my apartment. My final delivery of the day was to a slip number I didn't recognize, somewhere deep in the maze of floating docks. The map they'd given me was a faded, coffee-stained relic. After 20 minutes of wandering in circles, dragging a heavy handcart behind me, I was lost, frustrated, and sweating under the afternoon sun. And then I saw it. The Resolute, moored peacefully at the end of the pier. And there he was, sitting in the cockpit, reading a book, a pair of glasses perched on his nose. My heart gave a stupid, frantic little thump. This was my chance. Not a chance for anything real, but a chance to hear his voice, to be acknowledged, even for a moment. I took a breath, marshaling what little courage I had left. I walked down the pier, the wheels of the cart rumbling softly on the wooden planks. He looked up as I approached, his eyes, a calm, clear gray, lifting from the page. There was no surprise in his expression, just a quiet, patient inquiry. He didn't seem annoyed by the interruption. He seemed, if anything, anchored. "Excuse me," I said, my voice sounding thinner than I'd hoped. "I'm a little lost. I'm looking for slip C, 14-inch." He closed his book, marking his page with a finger. He set it aside with that same deliberate care I'd seen in all his movements. "C14, he repeated, his voice a low, pleasant baritone. It was exactly as I'd imagined it would be, steady and warm. "You've overshot it by a fair bit. It's back on the main pier, 2 rows over." He pointed, his hand large and tanned, the fingers long and capable. "Oh, right. The map?" I trailed off, feeling foolish. A small smile touched the corners of his mouth. It wasn't a smirk, but something gentler, kinder. Their maps are famously optimistic. "I'm Julian, by the way, Leo," I said, my hand automatically going to push back hair that wasn't in my face. It was a nervous habit I thought I'd broken. "Thanks, Julian. You saved me another half hour of wandering." His gaze drifted from my face to the handcart, laden with cans of high-gloss varnish and heavy-duty sealant. Then his eyes met mine again, and this time there was a different quality to them. An assessment. It wasn't cold or judgmental, just observant. He took in my worn jeans, the faint tremor in my hands from hauling the cart, the general air of fatigue I was sure clung to me like a second skin. "That's a lot of varnish," he said, his tone neutral. "Tell me about it." I managed, trying for a bit of levity. He was silent for a moment, his gaze steady. It wasn't the kind of look that made you squirm, it was the kind that made you feel seen. It was unnerving and, in a strange way, comforting. I'm about to start a big sanding and refinishing job on my own decks, he said, his voice thoughtful. It's more than a one-man job if I want it done before the autumn damp sets in. I could use a hand, my breath caught. I stared at him, trying to process the words. It felt like a line from a different life, a door opening into a world I only ever looked at from the outside. He must have seen the shock on my face, because he clarified immediately, his expression carefully neutral to avoid any hint of pressure. I pay well, above standard rate. It would be 2, maybe 3 weeks of steady work. Sanding, taping, varnishing. It's methodical work, but it's not difficult if you have a patient hand. He paused, letting the offer settle in the air between us. You can think about it. No pressure at all. But I thought I'd ask. I thought about my empty apartment. I thought about the dwindling balance in my bank account. I thought about the endless, soul-crushing scroll through online job boards. And then I thought about spending my days here, in the clean salt air, learning a tangible skill, working alongside this calm, steady man. The choice wasn't a choice at all. It was a lifeline. I'd like that, I said, the words coming out stronger and more certain than anything I'd said in months. Yes, I can start whenever you need. Julian's quiet smile returned, and this time it reached his eyes, crinkling the skin at the corners. Good. How about tomorrow morning? 8 o'clock. I'll be here, I promised. Excellent, he said. He stood, and I was struck by how tall he was, lean but with a solid presence. Let's get that cart to C14. It's on my way. I need to speak with the harbor master anyway. He didn't offer to pull the cart for me, a subtle gesture that I appreciated more than I could say. He walked beside me, matching my pace, and for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt solid. The next morning, I arrived at 7:45, my hands clean and a cheap thermos of coffee clutched in my fist. Julian was already there, wiping the morning dew from the boat's railings with a soft cloth. He wore simple khaki shorts and a plain gray t-shirt that fit well across his broad shoulders. He looked up and gave me a nod of greeting. Morning, Leo. You're early. Didn't want to be late, I said. Punctuality is a good quality, he said, his tone matter of fact. Coffee. He gestured toward the cabin. I brought my own. Thanks, mine's better, he said, without a hint of arrogance. It was a simple statement of fact, and the corner of his mouth twitched with that gentle, understated humor I was beginning to recognize. I found myself smiling back. He led me aboard, showing me how to step onto the gunwale without scuffing the finish. The boat felt solid and alive beneath my feet. Down in the galley, the air was warm and smelled of rich, dark coffee and lemon-scented wood polish. The space was compact but immaculate. Brass fixtures gleamed, and every object had its place. It was the physical embodiment of the order and calm he projected. He poured me a mug of coffee without asking how I took it, and it was, of course, perfect. Strong, black, and hot. We spent the first few hours with him showing me the ropes, quite literally. He explained the process, the tools, the specific grit of sandpaper for the first pass, the way to move with the grain of the wood, never against it. His instructions were clear, concise, and patient. He never talked down to me. He spoke to me as if I were a capable colleague, someone he trusted to care for his boat as he did. The work was grounding. The rhythmic scrape of sandpaper on wood, the focus required to keep the pressure even, the sun warming my back. It pulled me out of my head and into my body. We worked in a comfortable silence for the most part, the only sounds the whisper of our tools, the cry of gulls, and the gentle lapping of water against the hull. My observation of him, once a distant, passive thing, was now up close and constant. I watched his hands. They were incredible hands, tanned, with a light tracery of scars on the knuckles, but the movements were precise and almost delicate as he worked the sander along a difficult curve. He had a way of focusing that was absolute. When he was working on a piece of teak, the rest of the world seemed to fall away. I found that same level of focus in myself, a welcome stillness in my usually racing thoughts. Around noon, he straightened up, arching his back with a soft groan. Lunchtime, he announced. I have sandwiches. He disappeared into the galley and returned with 2 thick sandwiches wrapped in wax paper and 2 bottles of cold water. We sat on the deck, our backs against the warm cabin wall, and ate in that same easy silence. The sandwich was simple, turkey and Swiss on thick rye bread. but it was the best thing I'd eaten in weeks. "So, Leo," he said after a few minutes, breaking the silence. "What's your story?" The question was direct but gentle. It wasn't an interrogation. I gave him the short, edited version. That I'd moved here a year ago after my last business venture, a small design firm with a partner, had gone sour. I left out the part where the partner was also my boyfriend of 5 years, and the collapse had been both professional and brutally personal. I just said I was regrouping, trying to find my feet. He listened without interruption, his gray eyes watching my face. When I finished, he just nodded slowly. "Regrouping takes time," he said. "There's no shame in that," and that was it. No pity, no probing questions. Just a simple, powerful statement of acceptance. It felt like he'd reached out and steadied me. I spent the rest of the afternoon working with a renewed sense of purpose, a small, warm ember of hope glowing in my chest. The days settled into a rhythm. I'd arrive, we'd have coffee, we'd work. The initial layer of varnish came off, and the raw, pale wood was exposed. Then came the finer sanding, the dust coating our skin and clothes. Julian was a patient teacher, correcting my technique with a quiet word or a gentle adjustment of my hand on the tool. There was nothing possessive in his touch, just a brief, instructive contact that somehow left my skin buzzing long after he'd moved away. I started to notice the small things. The way his brow furrowed in concentration. The way he'd pause and just look out at the water, his expression unreadable but calm. He rarely spoke about his own life, but I pieced things together from small clues. He'd owned a successful logistics company, sold it a few years back. He had a daughter, grown and living on the other side of the country. This boat was his home, his project, his peace. One afternoon, as we were wiping down the decks with tack cloths to remove the last of the dust, our hands brushed. It was nothing, a fleeting contact of knuckles. But a jolt went through me, sharp and surprising. I pulled my hand back as if burned. I glanced at him, my face hot, but he gave no sign he'd noticed, his attention fixed on a stubborn patch of dust near a cleat. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was just an accident. It meant nothing. But my internal monologue went into overdrive, analyzing the brief touch, the weight of his skin against mine, the warmth that lingered. I was becoming acutely aware of the space between us. When we worked side by side on a narrow stretch of deck, the proximity was electric. I could smell the faint, clean scent of his soap mixed with the woody aroma of teak dust. I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. I found myself orchestrating my movements to be near him, then chiding myself for the foolishness of it. He was my employer. He was older, established, from a different world entirely. I was just the hired help, a temporary fixture in his well-ordered life. But then there were moments that confused me. He started leaving a bottle of cold water for me by the gangplank each morning. If the sun was particularly strong, he'd insist we take a break in the shade of the cabin, handing me a cool, damp cloth for the back of my neck. They were small acts of care, of protection, that went beyond the scope of an employer-employee relationship. Or maybe I was just reading too much into them, starved for any kind of kindness. One sweltering afternoon, my hand slipped while I was using a scraper to remove some old sealant. The metal edge sliced a clean, deep line across my palm. It wasn't a terrible cut, but it bled freely, the bright red a shocking contrast against my dusty skin. "Damn it," I muttered, pinching the wound closed. Julian was at my side in an instant. "Let me see," he said, his voice calm but firm. He gently took my hand, his thumb pressing against the cut to stanch the bleeding. His touch was surprisingly soft, yet utterly confident. The world narrowed to the feeling of his skin against mine, the steady pressure he applied. "It's not too bad," he said, his eyes scanning the cut with a practiced efficiency. "But it needs to be cleaned properly. Come on." He led me down into the galley, sat me on a cushioned bench, and opened a surprisingly comprehensive first aid kit. He worked with a quiet competence, cleaning the wound with an antiseptic wipe that stung like hell, then carefully applying a butterfly bandage to pull the edges together. All the while, he held my hand steady in his grip gentle but inescapable. I just watched him, my breath held tight in my chest. He was so close I could see the fine lines around his eyes, the faint silver stubble on his jaw. When he was done, he wrapped my palm in a clean gauze bandage, his movements neat and precise. He didn't let go of my hand right away. His thumb stroked softly over my wrist, a slow, deliberate movement that sent a shiver all the way up my arm. "You need to be more careful," he said, his voice low. His gray eyes met mine, and for a long moment, the silence in the small cabin was charged with 1,000 unspoken things. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of his gaze. It felt like he was looking right through my defenses, seeing the loneliness and the yearning I tried so hard to hide. Then he blinked, and the moment was gone. He released my hand, and the connection was broken. "That's enough for today," he said, his voice back to its normal, even tone. "Go home and rest it." "I'll finish up here." I didn't argue. I just nodded, gathered my things, and left, my bandaged hand throbbing in time with my heart. The brief brush of his thumb on my wrist had felt more significant, more intimate, than anything I had experienced in years. It was a touch that lingered, a small, ambiguous contact that my mind replayed over and over, trying to decipher its meaning. Was it just a comforting gesture? Or was it something more? The uncertainty was a sweet kind of torture. The next week, the weather forecast took a turn. A squall was predicted to blow in from the coast, bringing high winds and driving rain. The new varnish wasn't fully cured, and Julian was determined to get the boat covered and secured before the storm hit. The work became a race against time, a shared goal that dissolved the last vestiges of employer-employee formality between us. We were a team. We spent the day unfurling and fitting a massive canvas cover over the entire boat. It was a clumsy, difficult job, requiring us to work in close coordination. We were crawling over decks, shouting instructions over the rising wind, our bodies constantly bumping and brushing against each other in the confined space. The easy physical boundary we'd maintained was gone, replaced by a functional, necessary intimacy. At one point, I was struggling to secure a line on the far side of the bow, the wind whipping the canvas and making it impossible to get a grip. Suddenly, Julian was there behind me, his chest pressing against my back as he reached around me to help. "Here," he said, his voice a low rumble right by my ear. "Loop it under, then pull tight." Like this, his body was a solid wall of warmth behind me, shielding me from the wind. His arms were on either side of mine, his hands covering mine on the rope, guiding them. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. I was enveloped by his presence, his scent, the sheer solidness of him. We worked as one, his strength augmenting mine, until the line was secure. He lingered for a second longer than necessary, his breath warm on my neck, before he pulled back. "Good," he said, his voice a little rough. "Just a few more to go." We finished just as the first fat drops of rain began to fall. We scrambled down into the cabin, soaked and breathing hard, the sound of the rain drumming on the canvas cover overhead. It felt like we were in a cocoon, sealed off from the rest of the world. Julian ran a hand through his damp hair, a rare gesture of dishevelment, and looked at me. "We made it," he said, a genuine, unguarded smile on his face. "We did," I agreed, grinning back at him. We were both tired, damp, and victorious. It was a shared experience, a small triumph that felt intensely personal. He handed me a thick, soft towel. "Dry off," he said. "You'll catch a cold." As I toweled my hair, I watched him move around the galley, putting on a kettle for tea. He seemed completely at home, his movements fluid and sure even in the gently rocking boat. The storm outside was a distant roar, the world inside this cabin quiet and warm and safe. He brought 2 steaming mugs of tea to the small table where I was sitting. He sat across from me, his knees almost touching mine. The space felt charged, intimate. He cradled his mug in his hands, his gaze distant for a moment as he listened to the rain. "You're a good worker, Leo," he said, finally looking at me. "You learn fast. And you have a good heart." I felt a blush creep up my neck. "I just follow instructions. It's more than that," he said, his voice soft. "You have a sense of care. It's a rare thing." He took a sip of his tea, his eyes holding mine over the rim of the mug. "I've been meaning to ask you something. I hope this is okay." My stomach did a slow, nervous flip. "Okay," he set his mug down with a soft click. "I enjoy having you here. More than just as a worker." He paused, choosing his words with that familiar deliberation. "But I'm aware of the situation. I'm older. I'm your employer. The last thing I would ever want is for you to feel pressured, or that my offering you this job was some kind of transaction." He looked down at his hands, a flicker of vulnerability in his expression that I had never seen before. It was a moment of profound softness, a crack in the stoic facade. He was worried. He was worried about how I saw him, about the power dynamics I had spent so much time agonizing over myself. This arrangement, he continued, looking back up at me, his gaze earnest and direct. It ends when the work is done. Your payment is for your labor, nothing more. But I hope our acquaintance doesn't have to end then. I would like to know you better, Leo. As a friend, if you'd be open to that. The question hung in the air, a perfectly crafted, no-pressure invitation. He was giving me an out. He was showing me the boundary line and inviting me to decide if I wanted to cross it, making it clear that my safety and comfort were his priority. He wasn't a predator. He was a good man, a careful man, who was just as nervous about this as I was. The knot of anxiety in my stomach loosened, replaced by a wave of warmth and gratitude so intense it almost brought tears to my eyes. This was him opening a door, not a test, but a genuine, honest-to-God door. I'd like that too, Julian, I said, my voice quiet but steady. I'd like that very much. A slow smile spread across his face, a smile of pure relief. The tension in his shoulders eased. Good, he said softly. That's very good. The rain continued to drum on the roof, but inside the cabin, the storm had passed. We had navigated something delicate and had come out on the other side. Not as employer and employee, but as two men on the verge of something new. The storm blew itself out by morning, leaving behind a world washed clean and bright. The work on the boat was nearly finished. We spent the next 2 days applying the final coats of varnish, a task that required a delicate touch and a steady hand. The easy camaraderie we'd found during the storm had solidified into something deeper, a comfortable intimacy that hummed in the space between us. The loaded silences were still there, but now they felt less like tension and more like shared anticipation. On our last day of work, as we were cleaning the brushes and packing away the supplies, one of the other boat owners from down the pier stopped by. His name was Marcus, a man whose wealth was as loud as his voice. He had a flashy, modern yacht that looked more like a spaceship than a boat, and he treated the marina staff with a casual disdain that always set my teeth on edge. Well, Julian, Marcus boomed, stepping onto the newly finished deck without asking. Putting the boy to work, I see. Got to keep the bright work shiny. He winked at me, a greasy, condescending gesture that made my skin crawl. Hope he's paying you well, kid. He can certainly afford it. I felt my face flush with a mixture of anger and humiliation. The casual way he'd framed our relationship, rich man, poor boy, was exactly the narrative I'd been fighting in my own head. Before I could even think of a response, Julian stepped smoothly between me and Marcus, a subtle, protective movement that shifted the entire dynamic of the space. Leo is my colleague, Julian said, his voice perfectly level, but with an undercurrent of cold steel that I had never heard before. It wasn't loud, but it was utterly final. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't have to. The quiet authority in his tone was enough to make Marcus blink. And we're just finishing up. So if you'll excuse us, he stood there, a calm, immovable presence, until Marcus, with a mumbled apology, stepped off the boat and beat a hasty retreat. Julian watched him go, his jaw tight. Then he turned to me, the hardness in his eyes softening as they met mine. I apologize for that, he said, his voice low. He had no right to speak to you that way. It's fine, I said, looking down at the deck, my voice tight. It doesn't matter, it matters to me, he said, his voice firm but gentle. He took a step closer. Leo, look at me. I lifted my head, and his gaze was intense, searching. The air between us crackled. This was it, the tipping point, the moment where the subtext became text. What he implied, Julian said carefully, is not what this is. You know that, don't you? I nodded, unable to speak. I offered you a job because I saw someone competent and hardworking who could use a break. That's all it was. He paused, and his expression shifted, becoming more vulnerable. What it's become is something else. At least, for me, my heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. This was the loaded interaction, the one where every pause, every glance, held a universe of meaning. For me, too. I whispered, the words barely audible over the sound of the gulls. A flicker of something, relief, hope, passed through his eyes. He didn't move, didn't touch me. He was respecting the boundary, waiting for me to step forward. "The work is done now," he said, his voice quiet. "So the professional arrangement is over. Which means I can ask you a personal question." He waited. He was giving me the power, the agency to stop this at any time. "Okay," I breathed. "I would like to take you to dinner tonight," he said. "Not as your boss, not as a thank you for the work, but as a man who is very interested in getting to know you better. Is that something you would be comfortable with?" He had named consent. He had laid it all out, clear and transparent, with no room for misunderstanding. He was taking all the risk, making himself vulnerable to rejection, all to ensure I felt safe. The care in that gesture was overwhelming. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. "Yes, Julian," I said, my voice finally steady and clear. "I would be very comfortable with that." The relief that washed over his face was profound. It was like watching the sun break through the clouds. "Good," he said, his own smile finally breaking free. "That's very good." That evening felt surreal. He took me to a small, quiet Italian restaurant tucked away on a side street, a place with checkered tablecloths and candles flickering in wine bottles. It was perfect. We talked for hours. He told me about his daughter, an environmental lawyer in Oregon. He told me about building his company from the ground up, the long hours, and the sacrifices. He asked me about my design work, my aesthetic, my dreams for the future. He listened with that same focused intensity he applied to everything, making me feel like my half-formed plans were the most fascinating things in the world. There was no mention of the marina, of money, of the differences in our ages or our circumstances. We were just two men, talking, laughing, discovering the landscape of each other's lives. It was easy. It was natural. It felt right. When he drove me back to the marina, he didn't take me to the parking lot where I'd left my beat-up car. He drove right up to the pier and walked me back to the Resolute. The boat was dark and quiet, silvered by the light of a full moon. The newly varnished decks gleamed, reflecting the stars. We stood on the pier, the silence between us comfortable and full. The job was over. The dinner was over. The reason for our proximity was officially gone. I felt a familiar pang of anxiety, the fear that this perfect evening was just a fleeting interlude before I returned to my real life. "I'm going to miss this," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. I gestured vaguely at the boat, at the water, at everything. Julian turned to face me, his expression serious in the moonlight. He was so close I could feel the warmth of his body, smell the faint, lingering scent of his aftershave. "You don't have to," he said, his voice low and steady. And that was the breaking point. The simple, plain-spoken truth. My breath hitched. I looked into his eyes, and all the questions, all the yearning, all the hope of the past few weeks was reflected back at me. "Leo," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "I have developed very strong feelings for you." He said it like a confession, like a fact he had examined from all angles and found to be true. I know there are a dozen reasons why this is complicated, but I can't ignore it. And I don't want to. Tears pricked my eyes. It was too much, and yet it was everything. All the fear and uncertainty I'd been carrying just dissolved. "I feel the same way," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Julian, I didn't need to finish." He understood. He reached out, not to grab me, but to gently cup my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. The touch was electric, a confirmation of everything that had been simmering between us. "May I?" he asked, his voice rough with an emotion he was no longer hiding. I just nodded, leaning into his touch. He guided me onto the boat, onto the deck we had so carefully restored together. He led me to the helm, the captain's place. He took my hand, the one he had bandaged, and placed it on the cool, smooth wood of the ship's wheel. Then he covered my hand with his own, his fingers lacing through mine. The fit was perfect. "Feel it with me," he whispered, his voice resonating through me. He wasn't just talking about the boat anymore. He was talking about us, about this moment, about the steady, solid thing we were building between us. My fingers curled around the wheel, his hand a warm, grounding weight on top of mine. I turned my head. He is right there, his face illuminated by the moonlight, his gray eyes dark with want and a tenderness that takes my breath away. "This is real. This is happening." He leaned in, slow and deliberate, giving me every chance to pull away. I didn't. I met him halfway, and then he kissed me. It wasn't a kiss of desperate, pent-up passion. It was a kiss of arrival. It was slow and deep and sure, a perfect meeting of lips and breath and unspoken promises. It was the taste of salt and wine and a profound, bone-deep relief. It was unhurried. It was mutual. It was right. His other hand came up to cradle the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair, holding me steady. I melted into him, my hands leaving the wheel to wrap around his waist, pulling him closer, wanting to erase what little space was left between us. When we finally broke apart, we rested our foreheads together, breathing the same air. The boat rocked gently beneath us, a cradle on the dark water. I could feel the steady beat of his heart against my chest. "Stay," he murmured against my lips. "Stay the night." It wasn't a demand. It was a plea, soft and vulnerable. "Yes," I said, without a single shred of doubt. "Yes." I woke to the gentle rocking of the boat and the smell of fresh coffee. Sunlight streamed through the porthole of the guest cabin, painting a bright stripe across the perfectly made bed. I was wearing a soft, worn t-shirt of Julian's that he had given me the night before, and the faint, clean scent of him clung to the fabric. My own clothes were neatly folded on a chair. The memories of the previous night came flooding back. The kiss, the soft-spoken words, the feeling of falling asleep in his arms, safe and warm in the main cabin's large berth. It had been tender and chaste, an intimacy of closeness and whispered confessions, as if the kiss had been the consummation and everything after was simply a quiet settling. But in the clear, sober light of morning, a familiar chill of unease crept in. I was here, on this beautiful, expensive boat, wearing his clothes, about to drink his coffee. The power imbalance, which had seemed to vanish in the moonlight, felt stark and real again. Was I just his latest project? A stray he'd taken in, someone to fix and care for out of a sense of noblesse oblige? The old insecurities, the ones that had been my constant companions for the past year, whispered their poison in my ear. I swung my legs out of bed and padded out to the galley. Julian was there, his back to me, pouring coffee. He wore a simple pair of sweatpants and a t-shirt, his hair still damp from a shower. He looked comfortable at home. I felt like an intruder. He must have heard my footsteps, because he turned, a soft smile on his face. "Morning," he said, his voice warm. The smile faltered slightly as he saw my expression. His perceptive gaze missed nothing. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, fine," I said, my voice betraying me. I couldn't meet his eyes. I busied myself with getting a mug from the cupboard, my movements stiff and awkward. The easy intimacy of the night before felt a million miles away. He didn't press. He didn't crowd me. He simply placed a mug of coffee on the counter for me and leaned back against the opposite counter, giving me space. He waited, his silence patient and non-judgmental. "Julian," I started, my voice tight. "This is a lot. For me." I gestured around the pristine galley, a stand-in for everything. The boat, the money, the life he led. I don't want to be, I couldn't find the right word. A charity case? A kept boy? The thought was humiliating. He listened, his expression calm and serious. When I trailed off, he spoke, his voice gentle but firm. "Leo, what happened last night was real. My feelings for you are real. They have nothing to do with this boat or with money. They have to do with you. Your kindness, your quiet strength, the way you focus when you work. They have to do with the man you are." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I understand your concern, and I will do everything in my power to make sure you always feel like my equal, because you are. This isn't about me taking care of you. It's about us, hopefully, taking care of each other." His reassurance was direct and honest, addressing my fear without minimizing it. It helped, but the knot of anxiety in my chest remained. Words were one thing, action was another. As if he could read my mind, he shifted the topic to something practical. "I was thinking about what you said, about your design portfolio," he said, his tone changing to one of thoughtful problem-solving. "It must be hard to focus in that small apartment of yours." I nodded, wary of where this was going. "I have some warehouse space downtown for my new business venture, a small marine supply import company. It's mostly empty right now. There's a small, quiet office in the front with a great desk and good light. I was going to use it for storage, but it's a waste." He looked at me directly, his expression open and transparent. "I want you to use it as your studio. There's no rent. There are no strings attached. It's just an empty room that could be put to good use. A quiet place for you to work, to rebuild your business. It has nothing to do with us. It's just a space, I stared at him. It was a significant offer, a generous one. But the way he framed it, as a practical solution to a problem, an offer that deliberately preserved my independence and supported my own goals, was the real gift. He wasn't offering to pay my rent or give me money. He was offering me a tool, a resource to help me get back on my own 2 feet. He was investing in my autonomy, not my dependence. Julian, I started, overwhelmed. Think about it, he said, cutting me off gently. It's just an offer. You can say no. Your decision will have no bearing on you and me. He picked up his coffee mug. Now, how about some breakfast? I make terrible pancakes, but my scrambled eggs are passable. The gentle humor, the practical offer, the deliberate space he gave me. It all worked to soothe the raw edges of my insecurity. He wasn't trying to buy me or own me. He was trying to build a partnership with me. A few days later, we faced our first small test. I had agreed to look at the office space. We were walking down the main pier together, heading for the parking lot, when we passed Marcus, the loudmouthed boat owner. He was with another man, and as we passed, he gave Julian a knowing smirk and looked me up and down with a speculative gleam in his eye. He didn't say anything, but his look was loud and clear. I tensed, expecting the familiar shame to wash over me. But then I felt Julian's hand find mine, his fingers lacing through mine in a firm, confident grip. It wasn't a defiant gesture or an angry one. It was simple, quiet, and public. A statement of fact. We are together. He didn't even glance at Marcus. He just kept walking, his head held high, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. I looked at our joined hands, then up at his profile. He was calm, resolute. And holding his hand, I felt the same way. Marcus's opinion, the gossip of the marina, it all just faded. It didn't matter. What mattered was the warm, solid feel of Julian's hand in mine. We walked off the pier together, a united front, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that we were going to be okay. I accepted his offer of the office space. It was perfect. A clean, quiet room with a large window that let in the afternoon light. It was completely separate from his life, his boat, his home. It was mine. For the first time in over a year, I had a place to work that wasn't also the place I ate and slept. I spent my days there, sketching, designing, slowly and carefully rebuilding my portfolio and my client list. Our relationship grew in the spaces between. We didn't fall into a frantic, all-consuming romance. We built something slower, steadier. We took our time. Our dates were simple things. Dinners at quiet restaurants, long walks on the beach, evenings spent on the boat, not as a novelty, but as his home, a place he was sharing with me. We talked. We learned each other's rhythms, each other's histories. I told him about my ex, about the painful implosion of my old life. He listened, his quiet presence a safe harbor for my long-buried grief. He told me about his late wife, who had died of cancer 5 years prior, about his own journey through loneliness. We found a common ground in our shared experiences of loss and our cautious hopes for the future. We made conscious choices about how to navigate our differences. We established boundaries. When I was at the studio, I was working. He respected that, never dropping by unannounced, never blurring the lines between my professional life and our personal one. When I started to land a few small freelance jobs, I insisted on paying him a nominal rent for the office space. He argued at first, but when he saw how important it was for my sense of self-respect, he relented, accepting the check with a grave nod. It was a small thing, but it was a powerful symbol of our commitment to partnership over patronage. One Saturday morning a few months later, I woke up in his arms on the boat. It no longer felt like a foreign space. It felt like a second home. The gentle rocking of the water was a familiar comfort. I watched him sleep for a few moments. The stern lines of his face softened in repose. A powerful wave of affection washed over me, so strong it was almost painful. This man had not just offered me a job. He had offered me a chance to believe in myself again. He hadn't rescued me. He had stood by me while I rescued myself. I slipped out of bed and went to the galley to make coffee. A few minutes later, he joined me, wrapping his arms around my waist from behind and resting his chin on my shoulder. "Morning," he murmured into my hair. "Morning," I said, leaning back against his solid warmth. We stood like that for a long moment, watching the sun rise through the porthole, painting the water in shades of rose and gold. It was a quiet, domestic intimacy that felt more profound, more real, than any grand romantic gesture could ever be. We made breakfast together, moving around the small galley in an easy, practiced dance. It felt like arrival. It felt like peace. Later that day, we were sitting in the cockpit, reading in companionable silence. I put my book down and looked at him. He was absorbed in his novel, his brow slightly furrowed in concentration. The silver at his temples shone in the sun. He was handsome, yes, but it was the quiet integrity, the steady, unwavering kindness in him that I had fallen in love with. I thought back to the lost, anxious young man I had been just a few months ago, wandering the docks with a heavy cart and a heavier heart. I had come to the marina looking for directions, utterly adrift. I had been afraid of his wealth, of our age difference, of the power he held. I saw those things now not as barriers, but as simple context. His age had given him wisdom and patience. His wealth had given him the means to be generous, a generosity he wielded with immense care and respect. They were part of who he was, but they didn't define us. What defined us was the way he listened, the way he held my hand in public, the way he had created a space for me to find my own strength. He had never tried to change me or fix me. He had simply opened a door and trusted me to walk through it. He must have felt my gaze, because he looked up from his book, his gray eyes soft and questioning. "What is it?" I smiled, a full, genuine smile that came from a place of deep, settled happiness. "Nothing," I said. "Everything," he smiled back, a slow, warm smile that reached his eyes. He reached across the space between us and took my hand. His palm was warm and calloused, familiar and strong. I am no longer a ghost haunting the edges of his world. I am a part of it, and he is a part of mine. Our foundation feels solid, settled, built not on the shifting sands of passion or obligation, but on the bedrock of mutual respect and a quiet, steady love. I am less afraid and more steady. I am home. Share your thoughts in the comments. What moment stayed with you? If the story resonated, a like helps others find it. Subscribe for more slow burn male/male love stories told with warmth and care.